What if one day, everything you thought you knew about your life, about your relationships, was shattered in an instant? What if someone you trusted, someone you had known your entire life, suddenly became a stranger? This is a story about betrayal, secrecy, and a moment that altered everything. It begins on a quiet Saturday, a day that should have been like any other, but a question was asked, and that question changed everything. She was alone at home, a peaceful weekend unfolding before her. The house was calm, the kind of calm that makes the world seem as if it's slowing down, the kind of quiet that makes you forget about time. She was cleaning, moving through the house, lost in the rhythm of everyday life, just a girl in her own space, enjoying a moment of peace. The sound of music played softly in the background, an ordinary soundtrack for an ordinary day. But everything changed in a split second. Jay, her stepbrother, walked in, earlier than she expected. His presence shifted the atmosphere almost immediately. There was something different about him that day, something she couldn't quite place, but it was there. It wasn't that he was angry or that he had done anything out of the ordinary. It was the look in his eyes, the way his gaze lingered just a little too long, the way his words came out slowly. He'd never been one to make things complicated, and yet, this time, he was different. She could feel it in the air, the tension. The words he spoke felt too heavy for the room. She was standing there, holding the broom, frozen in place, unsure of how to react when he asked her the question. "Do you ever wonder what it would be like if we were more than just step-siblings?" His voice was calm, but there was something intense about the way he said it, something that made her stomach drop. In that moment, everything shifted. The world seemed to stop, her heart pounding in her chest. Was he serious? Was it a joke? She couldn't be sure, but the way he looked at her told her this was no lighthearted comment. It was a question that should never have been asked, yet it hung in the air, impossible to ignore. As we reflect on this real-life story, subscribe and don't forget to turn on the notification bell for more daily stories that need to be heard. Hit that subscribe button. And let us hear from you in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Now let's continue. For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The silence was thick, filled with uncertainty and a tension neither could easily shake. She didn't know what to do, what to say. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. The bond they shared as step-siblings had always been simple, clear. They had their differences, sure, but there had never been anything like this before. What did this mean for them? And how could she navigate this new territory? As the days passed, she tried to push it from her mind. She went about her life, telling herself it was just a weird moment, nothing more. But deep down, she could feel it, the shift. Jay's presence around her felt different now, more charged. There was an unspoken tension that lingered between them, building with every glance, every exchange. It wasn't obvious to anyone else, but to her, it was undeniable. And with every day that passed, it grew harder to ignore. It wasn't long before the tension spilled over. One evening, after an awkward exchange, they found themselves alone together again. The silence between them was almost unbearable, but this time it was different. The air around them felt heavy with anticipation, and then it happened. A kiss. It wasn't planned, it wasn't expected, but it happened, and everything changed. In that one brief moment, the weight of everything they had been avoiding finally came crashing down. Afterward, there was no easy way to move forward. The guilt, the confusion, they both felt it. They knew what had just happened wasn't right, but neither of them could deny the overwhelming intensity of it. What had started as a fleeting question had now become something much more complicated. It wasn't just about a kiss, it was about what it meant, about the feelings that had been awakened, feelings neither of them were prepared to face. Days turned into weeks, and the situation became harder to ignore. They both tried to go on as if nothing had changed, but it was impossible. Every glance, every touch, even the way they spoke to each other, everything carried an undertone they couldn't escape. Their relationship, once simple and uncomplicated, had been irrevocably altered. And with that change came the weight of their actions. They found themselves caught between two conflicting realities: the guilt of what they had done, and the undeniable chemistry that seemed to draw them together even more. They tried to move past it, but the more they did, the more it seemed to pull them in. But the questions never stopped. What now? Where did they go from here? Was this something they could keep hidden forever, or would it eventually tear them apart? There were no easy answers, no clear path forward. Every decision felt like a gamble. Every action was weighted with the knowledge that one wrong move could unravel everything. And yet, even as the fear and uncertainty gripped them, there was a part of them deep down that couldn't resist. They had crossed a line, and no matter how hard they tried to justify it, no matter how much they tried to pretend it didn't happen, the truth was always there, hanging between them. It was a secret they couldn't share with anyone, something they had to keep locked away in their hearts. The weight of it pressed on them every day, and yet the connection they shared was undeniable. They had both learned something in the process, something about themselves, about temptation, and about the fragile boundaries of relationships. But what would be the ultimate cost of this dangerous game they were playing? Would the truth eventually come out, or would it remain buried in the depths of their secret? The questions lingered, unanswered, as they tried to navigate a path that no one could have predicted and no one would ever understand. And as they continued to walk this uncertain road, they couldn't help but wonder, was there any going back now, or had they already crossed a point of no return? She was just a normal young woman, enjoying a peaceful weekend at home, cleaning the house, lost in her thoughts. She never expected her life to change so drastically. The day was calm, the kind of quiet that made everything feel still, as if time itself had slowed down. I do hope you have subscribed already, as it is about to get really interesting. Jay, her stepbrother, was the typical older brother, aloof at times, maybe a bit distant, but nothing out of the ordinary. They had always gotten along just fine, the relationship between them simple and uncomplicated. They shared a home, but there was never anything that felt out of place. The house was quiet, cozy, a place where she could focus on the little tasks of the day, unaware of how quickly everything was about to shift. We've all had those moments where we're alone with our thoughts, lost in the peace. But when something unexpected disrupts that peace, it changes everything. And that's exactly what happened when Jay walked through the door. It was a Saturday afternoon. She was alone, cleaning the house, when Jay came home earlier than expected. His presence wasn't alarming at first, just unusual. The door creaked open, and he stepped in, a little more quickly than usual, his footsteps heavy as he walked across the room. There was something different about him that day, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Maybe it was just her imagination. As she wiped down the counter, she noticed how his eyes lingered on her, how his gaze seemed sharper, more focused. For a moment, she felt a slight discomfort, a tension she couldn't explain. But it wasn't until he spoke that the world around her shifted. He looked at her in a way she hadn't seen before. His expression was unreadable, his eyes a little too intense. And then, almost casually, he asked, "Do you ever wonder what it would be like if we were more than just step-siblings?" The words hit her like a wave. She froze, unsure if she'd heard him correctly. The question seemed simple, even innocent, but there was something about it, something in the way he said it, that made her heart race. Her mind struggled to process what had just happened. Was it a joke? Was he testing her reaction? Or was it something more? Something darker? She couldn't tell. At that moment, everything felt like it was suddenly off balance. The house that had once felt so familiar now seemed foreign, like the walls were closing in. What was once a safe, comfortable space now felt like a place full of questions with no easy answers. Her pulse quickened as she tried to find her voice, but for a few seconds she couldn't speak. Everything she had known, every boundary she'd taken for granted, was now in question. Over the next few days, the tension between them became undeniable. They tried to carry on with their daily lives as if nothing had changed, but it was impossible to ignore. Every glance, every exchange, every simple interaction was laced with something unspoken, something that hung between them like an invisible thread. They found themselves constantly aware of the space they shared, each movement, each word carrying more weight than it ever had before. She would catch his eye from across the room, and for a split second, the world seemed to stop. That same intensity in his gaze, that same question still lingering between them. She could feel it, a tug at her heart, a pull she couldn't explain. It was like they were both trapped in a moment, unable to move forward or back, and the silence was deafening. Guilt started to haunt them both. The chemistry was undeniable, the connection something neither of them had anticipated, and yet, every time they felt that spark, a wave of shame followed. They both knew it was wrong, knew that whatever was happening between them crossed a line that should never have been crossed, and yet, no matter how hard they tried to push it away, they couldn't escape it. Every glance felt like a secret, every stolen moment a risk. It wasn't just about physical attraction, it was the emotional complexity of it all. They were family, and that made everything infinitely more complicated. But the feeling was there, intense, consuming, and it grew stronger with each passing day. They tried to act normal, tried to forget about that moment, but the connection between them kept pulling them back, like a magnet they couldn't resist. For her, it was a constant struggle, a battle between guilt and desire. Every time she saw him, every time they interacted, it felt dangerous, but also irresistibly intense. Her mind told her to stay away, to put distance between them, but her heart was drawn to him in a way she didn't understand. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, a connection that felt deeper than she was ready to confront, and soon it became impossible to ignore. The more she tried to push it aside, the stronger the pull became. One night, after a particularly intense confrontation, they found themselves alone again. The tension between them had reached its peak, the air thick with unspoken words. They had both been trying to avoid the inevitable, but at that moment, neither of them could deny what had been building between them. The conversation had started innocently enough, but somewhere along the way it escalated. Words were said that neither of them fully understood. Feelings were exposed that neither of them had planned to reveal. The space between them felt charged, and before they knew it, the room seemed to close in around them. And then, almost without thinking, they kissed. It wasn't planned, it wasn't something they'd even discussed, but there it was, an act that neither of them could undo. The kiss was brief, but it left a lasting mark on both of them. As they pulled away, the weight of what they had just done hit them both like a tidal wave. The guilt was overwhelming, suffocating. They looked at each other, eyes wide, and for a moment, neither knew what to say. But in that instant, neither of them could stop. The chemistry between them had crossed the line, and there was no going back. The next few days were a blur. The kiss had altered everything. It wasn't just about what had happened in that single moment, it was the psychological toll it took on both of them. They couldn't escape the feeling of that kiss, couldn't erase it from their minds. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, a deep and complex connection they couldn't make sense of. And with it came the constant question, what now? They couldn't deny the attraction, but they also couldn't ignore the moral dilemma that loomed over them. Was this a mistake? Or was it something more? They had crossed a boundary, and it was no longer just a momentary lapse in judgment. It was something that had changed the very nature of their relationship. As they navigated their new reality, they were forced to confront the weight of their actions. Would they admit what had happened? Would they tell someone, or would they live with the secret, letting it eat away at them? The idea of confession seemed impossible. Who could they tell? What would people think? The secrecy created an additional burden, one that neither of them was sure how to bear. The psychological toll was immense. Every time they saw each other, they felt the pressure of the unspoken truth. It wasn't just about what they had done, it was about what it meant, about the future they couldn't predict. Would they be able to continue living under the shadow of this secret, or would it eventually break them both? The weight of the situation pressed on them both, each day bringing new doubts, new questions. And as the days stretched into weeks, they were left to wonder if there was any way to go back, or if they had already crossed a point of no return. The twist in their story was just beginning, and neither of them could escape the consequences of their actions. After the kiss, things spiraled quickly. What had started as a simple question had now turned into a tangled web of emotions, secrets, and consequences. They couldn't go back to how things had been before. Every conversation, every glance, every moment they shared was overshadowed by the knowledge of what had happened. The guilt, the confusion, it all began to consume them. Please, my lovely family, remember to subscribe and hit the bell icon so that you won't ever miss the next thrilling story coming up next. They tried to carry on as if nothing had changed, but it was impossible. The secret they shared felt like a heavy burden, one that neither of them could escape. They were no longer just step-siblings, they were something more complicated, something neither of them had ever anticipated. The connection they had felt so strongly only intensified with time, but so did the weight of their actions. They both knew that they couldn't live in this suspended state forever. In the end, they were forced to make a choice. Would they continue living with the secret, hiding it from the world, or would they face the consequences of what they'd done? The fear of being caught, the fear of judgment, was almost too much to bear, but at the same time, the pull they felt toward each other was undeniable, making it hard to let go. Eventually, they both realized that continuing down this path wasn't sustainable. The tension between them reached a breaking point, and they could no longer ignore the truth of their situation. Something had to give. They made a decision to put distance between them, to try to move forward with their lives separately. It wasn't easy. The emotional toll was immense, and the guilt never fully went away. It hung over them, a reminder of the lines they had crossed, but they knew that the consequences of their actions were far greater than they had anticipated. In the end, no matter how strong the temptation, some lines are never meant to be crossed. Sometimes, the consequences of our actions are far greater than we realize. What they had experienced was a momentary lapse in judgment, but the emotional and psychological repercussions would stay with them for much longer. They both walked away, knowing that their lives would never be the same. The bond they once had as family was forever altered, and no amount of time or distance could erase the truth of what had happened between them. The secret they had shared would remain just that, a secret, locked away in the depths of their minds, a reminder of the danger of temptation and the complexity of human emotions. What would you have done if you found yourself in a similar situation? Is there ever a time when crossing that line can be justified, or is the emotional and moral cost too high? It's a difficult question, and one that many people may find themselves asking after hearing this story. We want to hear your thoughts on this complex issue. How do you think families should navigate difficult emotions and boundaries? Please share your opinions, theories, and emotional reactions in the comments below. Your perspective is important to us. This story highlights the importance of healthy boundaries and clear communication in any relationship, especially within a family. Open, honest conversations and mutual respect can strengthen the bond between loved ones and prevent misunderstandings. It's crucial to recognize when emotions are running high and to seek guidance when things get confusing or overwhelming. Families need to create a space where each member feels heard and valued, ensuring that the trust and love between them remains intact. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping true crime stories. Make sure to hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. We have plenty of more real-life cases coming that you won't want to miss. Want to hear more about complicated family dynamics and forbidden relationships that became full-blown mysteries? Check out our other video on link to similar content, where we dive deeper into the complexities of human emotions and the consequences of crossing boundaries. Thanks for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next one.